This is Breakthrough News, and you are watching the Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here as always, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, as always, great to be back alongside you.
It's good to be back alongside you, Eugene, though I'll tell everyone from the top of the hour, I am very stressed out. I am in Lebanon right now, and things here are intense and not great.
Yes, I can't say more than that. That is a very good point, and I think we're going to be getting into that a little bit later as well as we go throughout the show. We've got a great show for you as always. So at the top, I'll just remind everyone who is watching on YouTube that now is a great opportunity to go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Go ahead and hit the bell so you get the alerts. Make sure you have your notifications turned on so that everything comes through, so that you do not have to work very hard to find all of the great content that we are putting out on a regular basis here at Breakthrough News, including dispatches with Rania Khalek. So again, make sure you hit the subscription button, make sure you hit the bell, make sure you turn your notifications on. If you happen to be watching us on Free Speech TV, we just shout you out and say continue to support FSTV, and shout out to their whole team for making it possible for us to appear on that platform as well. Rania, are there other things that you would like to tell our viewers as we get started here?
Yeah, I want to remind everybody that we here at Breakthrough News are an independent media outlet, and we are able to keep going and growing and bring you news from all over the world because of support from our audience. So if you are able, please consider becoming a member of Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news. And for as little as $5 a month, you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. But most importantly, you can be basically at the center of supporting an independent media outlet that's breaking through the mainstream propaganda that continues to sell us endless war and all the things.
Yes, absolutely. And shout out to all of our existing patrons and all of our existing followers. I've met a lot of people who are following Breakthrough News this week, sort of completely randomly. So you know who you are, but appreciate all the positive comments that I was able to get in different parts of the city of Baltimore this week from people out in the public. But I think we can go ahead and get started here with our first story as we embark on today's show, March the 12th. And of course, as the U.S. Israeli war in Iran and the Israeli war in Lebanon continue to rapidly escalate, there is an ongoing conflict between Afghanistan and Pakistan that over the past weekend significantly increased in terms of the intensity of the clashes. On Friday, Pakistan carried out airstrikes in 20 locations, I think more than 20 locations across Afghanistan. 56 civilians were killed, 129 were injured. So to discuss all of this and how it impacts a number of other things happening in the region, we are very happy to be joined here on the show by Obaidullah Baheer, who is a PhD scholar at the New School and also an adjunct lecturer at the American University of Afghanistan. Obaidullah, as always, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Eugene. Hi, Rania. I wish we could start meeting at better times. It's just extremely unfortunate that we have to sit down and talk when there is military escalations and killings happening.
Yes, no, I agree with you 100%. And because of everything happening in Iran, I think what's been happening between Afghanistan and Pakistan for a lot of people has flown under the radar. But it seems to be quite a significant conflict, and that there is still a lot of potential escalation in the wings here. Maybe for those who just haven't seen this at all, give us some sense of just what the status quo ante is as it concerns the conflict between the two countries. Pakistan, at least, is calling an open war.
You're right, Eugene. I mean, it is very suspiciously timed, considering that the Iran war was in the pipeline and these military escalations and what Pakistan dubs as an open conflict or open war has started. So what it has meant is, for the first time in history, we've had Pakistan belligerently and with complete impunity bombing Afghan cities. They've bombed refugee camps, one really close to the border, the Umari camp, where returnees from Pakistan were located and were supposed to be moved from there. The numbers that you quoted of the civilian deaths are UN's official numbers. We've had Amnesty International and other international networks report on it as well. But of course, it's a world in which there are so many hierarchies that you end up being epistemically ignored and become invisible in larger conflicts. But I think it is in some ways tied up up with the Iranian conflict. Certain analysts believe that even though the Americans might not have encouraged the Pakistani adventurism into Afghanistan, but it seems like Pakistan is propping itself as a possible partner for any future military intervention into Afghanistan. And it's unfortunate because it's leading us to a point of no return where even if this conflict stops, we will have no normal to return to. I mean, even in Pakistan right now, the police forces are abducting and detaining as many Afghans as they can find, and they're not even moving them to refugee camps. They're actually putting them in jails in a situation where the border is shut, right? These people cannot even return home. So it's just a large project of humiliation. And the other similarity with the Iran war is this is a war that has no end game, right? I mean, we've heard Trump give 10 different scenarios in which this war ends, and it's like spaghetti being thrown at the wall and trying to figure out what sticks. With Pakistan as well, there have been so many different scenarios that are discussed as to what would mean the end of this war. We know the Pakistanis don't have the economic power to overthrow the Taliban or hold Afghanistan or install another government. Then all that this means is making Afghanistan unstable in a situation where 7.2 million refugees have returned in the past 5 years in an economy that's already struggling. So it's quite unfortunate, and mediators and possible mediators are so caught up in what is happening in Iran that no one's really stepping in or using their political leverage to ask Pakistan to stop. Because ultimately, if your concern really is TTP as a local insurgent group that's killing your soldiers inside your country, the solution surely cannot be having an unstable neighbor that could turn into a geographical vacuum that such groups really thrive in.
Obaidullah, I want to ask you if you can speak to the way that, on the other hand of all of this, there are downstream impacts of the war, the U.S. Israeli war on Iran for Afghanistan. How is it impacting Afghanistan?
So Afghanistan, Iran for us represents one of our biggest trade partners. A lot of our shops are stocked with products from Iran. Iran's fuel is sustaining our economy. So in a lot of ways, that being disrupted, the refugees that were already facing difficult times there, that impact, and then largely just this war being so big that it's sidelining anything that could be said about Afghanistan. All of those are ways that Afghanistan is impacted. I mean, I keep thinking about the war in Iran, and I wonder about Fukuyama's book by the end of the Cold War, The End of History, and the New Man. It's like maybe one should retitle that as The End of the World, and the Idiot Man. Because, hey, I mean, what is the ultimate goal here? Embroiling the whole Middle East into an unnecessary conflict, a cost that cannot be justified under God's sun. $40 billion, the fact that it's costing $1 billion every day. And now Trump is supposedly saying that he's going to carry on this conflict for 3 to 4 more weeks. $40 billion means thousands of Americans, tens of thousands of Americans, whole student debt being erased. It means that the healthcare becomes better. There's so many better ways that $40 billion can be used, but instead you use it to replace Ayatollah with Ayatollah, or with what Piers Morgan was pushing Mehdi Hassan to say as to whether he was pleased that Ayatollah was no more. In a world where we keep justifying means because the ends supposedly serve our interests, what's the point of international law? What's the point of the international order? The whole point of the world sitting down after the Second World War was to agree on certain red lines that we wouldn't cross. We wouldn't abduct sitting heads of state. We wouldn't bomb, assassinate heads of state. We wouldn't start unjust wars. And look at where we are. Like it's like the whole international order was a house of cards that has just crumbled. So, and then Afghanistan is a country that's already at the front lines of the impacts of climate change, of the impact of America's adventurism for 20 years and barely finding its feet, having the Iran conflict shroud what Pakistan is doing to us, our people, and our economy is unfortunate and heartbreaking.
Yeah, very good point about the healthcare. Washington Post had an article this morning about some large number of Americans skipping meals to afford healthcare. So it speaks very much to that. One of the things about the U.S. factor here is that they also, I think it was a couple days ago, maybe it was just yesterday, they have now labeled Afghanistan as I've actually never heard of this definition, something like a global sponsor of abductions. And then you had the special envoy for, U.S. people who've been kidnapped abroad saying, don't become the next Venezuela or Iran. Like, good luck with that, which, the meaning there is very true. So, it just seems that the U.S. is kind of doubling down in this moment as well. And I thought it was interesting the point you were making in terms of how Pakistan may be positioning vis-a-vis U.S. designs on Afghanistan.
On this designation, there's a saying in Pashto which says there's one roof, but there's two sets of air blowing on it, right? So there's the same world, but two sets of rules that apply. It's quite unfortunate that the US can create a new list of designated states of illegal detention or hostage taking in a world where they had Abu Ghraib, they had Guantanamo, they had Bagram, they had 4,000 or more people that they did not even classify as human beings worthy of human rights because these were enemy combatants. So they were outside the ambit of international law, rendition, torture, you name it. And these are not just stories. These people, some of them are still alive that you could talk to. The fact that there are still prisoners in Guantanamo Bay for the United States to create such a list is quite ironic, to say the least. But considering that the United States, at least so far, hasn't had a very clear policy towards Afghanistan, which is fortunate, but is also an opening that Pakistan exploits in its actions against Afghanistan. The designation doesn't really have serious meaning unless sanctions follow. But then there's also a world where we're already under so much American pressure. It's not like they're trading with us. It's not like they're giving us aid. It's not like the Taliban leaders are traveling to Hawaii for vacations. So what are you even threatening us with? So it's a lot of bravado and chest beating, which is unnecessary because, hey, if you have American prisoners inside Afghanistan, there are ways to diplomatically talk about it, get them released, talk about a future framework of such situations not arising. We're not the crazies that are portrayed to the world, especially to justify wars where we have no rationality and we're willing to pick up Americans and hurt America in any way. We're a people that want to be left alone. We're a people who want to thrive, who want to build a better tomorrow. But unfortunately, we're faced with a neighbor right now that has a military dictatorship installed, a military dictatorship that has tied itself at the hip with Trump. The fact that you could view the interviews of their prime minister and their field marshal, which is supposedly a new dictatorial position, and how often they, for lack of better words, simp to Trump. It's just unfortunate that that means a blank check of the United States. And the role of a hegemon was supposed to be to police the world, in a good way. And somehow when the hegemon ends up becoming the biggest abuser, then obviously everyone else is going to take a lesson from that. Why do countries not care anymore about bombing other cities? Is because the US has set a precedent where it's okay to do whatever you want as long as it's in line with your national interest. And then you can manufacture consent later. God bless social media and troll and tout accounts that can make it sound like everything you do is justified.
Obaidullah, I really want to ask you, considering, you've watched your country, Afghanistan, be subjected to various American military campaigns and invasion and occupation that lasted quite some time. As you see this U.S. administration they've carried out they've launched this war against Iran in partnership with the Israelis, and they're talking about putting boots on the ground. They're talking about a potential ground invasion. I'm just curious your general thoughts as you watch these moments play out, having experienced what Afghanistan has experienced, from the U.S. Actually, both Republican and Democratic administrations.
Rania, I was in Iran 2 months ago, and the last time I'd been there was 20 years ago. So just being there was so heartbreaking because these are hardworking people trying to build a country in a world that has sanctioned them to a crippling effect. The fact that an average Iranian barely makes $100 a month shows you how difficult life there is economically. And even in the face of that, Iran produces everything that it can produce, from the smallest products to the biggest products. So they're a very self-sustained economy. And the fact that they can't sell those things to anyone because of international sanctions is the reason that their economy is the way that it is. So seeing Tehran and seeing how big and populated that city is, and then seeing the videos that emerge of the bombing, there's no way you're avoiding civilian targets. There's no way. I mean, the fact that your first bombing was on a school and you try to deny it, and then ultimately you get caught with your lie, just shows you that foreign occupation does not come with liberation. It does not come with flowers. There's barely any large a benevolent intent. It's usually very short-term, national interest-driven operations. I mean, look at Venezuela. They keep telling you that, oh, they try to do something different, and then they install the same people back in power. As long as it's someone who nods when they give commands, then it's good to go, right? It was never about democracy. It was never about liberalism. I mean, the whole of Latin America is a case study to look at. So in Iran as well, I'm pretty sure, and I might be wrong, but in the long run, after a few weeks of bombing, they will find a way to settle with the very same akhuns that they supposedly are fighting, and then find a reason as to how this was justified to do. And hey, we hurt their military, we hurt their capabilities. It's the whole weapons of mass destruction happening all over again. You don't need to show any proof as long as you have enough crazies who are willing to jump into a war with you. And the fact that after 7th of October and the genocide in Palestine, we finally have the reality of how deeply controlled the United States is by Israel, the fact that they can drive them into wars. And these are the lists of countries that Netanyahu named Iran, and they're going after each and every one of them. But fortunately, I don't think that they will have troops on the ground. The United States would not risk it themselves. There is no other ally around as long as the Gulf countries do not conspire to do so. It seems like the economic global pressure is going to be enough to get the United States to back off from its adventurism. I hope that is the case because I really don't want to see another Iraq happening in Iran. And sort of is karma as well, Rania. I mean, I love the Iranian people, but when they watched as this happened to Iraq, when they allowed for the United States to come into Afghanistan, they should have thought about how at some point down the line it would be their turn. And I really wish that the Arab countries think about that as well. What's the famous fable of the three oxes where one of them conspires with a lion, and eventually one after the other, when it's the last one's turn, he realizes that he had died the moment he sold off the first one. And this is going to happen to the countries in the region unless they can wake up and work together.
Well, Obaidullah, as always, we really appreciate you joining us here and sort through it all. And I agree with what you said at the outset. Hopefully the next time we talk, it'll be on a much more positive note. But Obaidullah Baheer, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you. And Rania, if you hear sirens, run inside, not outside. Sometimes people get confused.
That's good to know. Yes, it's better to have cover somewhere. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Rania, anything you want to add before we plunge ahead here?
No. I mean, are we ready for the next guest? Sorry, I want to apologize to our audience if I seem like a bit distracted. I keep looking at my phone just for updates because the Israelis are issuing warnings to buildings in central Beirut, which is supposed to be a safe area, but it has not been. Randomly throughout the week, they've struck a building twice. Not sure if it was if they hit an apartment. They had warned about 30 minutes prior to that we're going to hit this, and it's really like in the heart of Beirut, close to everything, close to the parliament downtown, close to UN headquarters, close to everything. And then it's, you know, the city is like freaking out. And then now they issued another warning. And so now everybody's waiting for a building near the building they already struck to potentially or likely be struck by the Israelis. So just really completely terrorizing the people of Beirut right now.
Yeah, well, not a distraction at all. I think that's important to have these live updates coming and for people to know what's happening there in Lebanon. So we appreciate you staying up to date and keeping us updated as we go through the show. And I think at the end, people stick with us. We'll be able to talk more about all of this. But yes, we do have our next guest ready for us and ready to go. And of course, the broader U.S. Israeli war on Iran is rapidly destabilizing the broader Persian Gulf. Countries that have long marketed themselves as pillars of regional stability are directly in the crosshairs. So to help us understand how the Gulf governments are responding, we are very happy to be joined by Giorgio Cafiero, who is the CEO of Gulf State Analytics, to discuss the growing risk for the region's security, diplomacy, and economic model. Giorgio, as always, thanks so much for being with us.
I think he's muted.
Thank you. It always helps to unmute. Yes, so good to be with the two of you.
Excellent. No, I thought maybe I was breaking up. Anyway, great to have you here. So just jumping right into it, Giorgio, we're now in the second week of this war. Wow, even saying that, it seems like it's been a lot longer, that the U.S. and Israel had initiated against Iran, and the Gulf states are finding themselves directly in the line of fire here. The Iranian missiles are targeting U.S. bases, civilian infrastructure all across the region. It seems the interceptors also that are being fired, they also cause their own debris and damage across the Gulf countries. So these states really built their entire economic model around being islands of stability, quote unquote, in a volatile region. So curious your thoughts on how Gulf leaders are interpreting what's happening right now. Are they viewing this as a war that's effectively being fought from their territory, but without their consent?
Yeah, again, thanks so much for having me on. So much to get into. Since the American-Israeli war on Iran began late last month, the Gulf Arab states have been basically on fire, especially the United Arab Emirates has suffered a lot as a consequence of the expansion and the regionalization of the conflict. Essentially, Iran has a strategy aimed at essentially ensuring that if it is to be attacked by the U.S. and Israel, it will do everything it can to disrupt the region and to disrupt the global economy. I think without addressing the morality of any of this, there is a strategic rationale. What Iran is trying to do is play all the cards it has to put as much pressure as possible on the Americans to halt the aggression against Iran, but beyond that, to establish deterrence capacity so that Washington concludes that the costs of attacking Iran are so high that the U.S. never considers bombing Iran again or permitting Israel to do the same. This is what Iran's objectives are. And so within that context, Iran has been targeting not only military facilities that host U.S. personnel, military personnel in the GCC states, but also high revenue generating targets in the Gulf Arab states, international airports, apartment complexes, luxury hotels, energy facilities, maritime ports, so on and so forth. Now, from the perspective of the Gulf Arab leaders and the Gulf Arab societies, this is absolutely unacceptable. They tried very hard to stay out of this conflict. The GCC states believe that this is not their war. They did everything they could, especially Oman, to try to create diplomatic off-ramps to avert this conflict. They tried so hard to persuade the Trump administration to not bomb Iran. And now that the U.S. decided to wage this war, they are caught up in it. And they believe that it is very immoral and very illegitimate for Iran to lash out by targeting countries that are not a party to the conflict. So there is a lot of anger in the Gulf Arab states toward Iran, which is understandable. But what's really important for us to understand is that there is also a lot of anger against the United States in the GCC right now. They believe that the U.S., in choosing to wage this war, has destabilized the region in ways that the GCC states will pay for in so many costly ways. Obviously, a lot more to get into, but let's at least start the conversation out with that.
Well, no, I appreciate that, Giorgio. And, I want to, before I ask my next question, I want to play a clip of Senator Lindsey Graham. So can we pull up that clip of Lindsey Graham talking about what he thinks the Gulf states should be doing?
Now, to our Arab friends, you're being hit too. Has any Arab country struck Iran? Now, if you want a treaty with the United States, you need to get in this fight. Now, America's not going to the Mideast just to fight alone. So I'm urging our Arab allies to fight back. You're being hit too.
So there's Lindsey Graham really trying to goad the Gulf Arab states into getting more directly involved in, I guess, striking Iran. I assume that's what he wants them to do. But of course, they've been extremely cautious about direct participation because they know that would make them even bigger targets for Iranian retaliation. So, I'm just curious, Giorgio, does this moment, force Gulf governments to reassess their relationship with the U.S., especially if they feel like Washington is effectively turning their territory into a battlefield? And then on top of that, do they still see this supposed U.S. security umbrella as a stabilizing force or increasingly as a source of instability given what's taken place over the last few weeks?
Yeah, when we're talking about the geopolitical order and the security architecture of the Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula, these are really some of the most important questions to focus on right now. Just to sort of repeat what I said earlier, I think that the consequences of this war are going to be very serious in terms of their impact on the future of GCC states' relationships with the United States. For decades, the 6 GCC members have counted on the United States as a security umbrella. But now we're talking 13 days of Iranian missiles and drones pounding all of these cities in the Gulf. It's very difficult for them to explain what is the utility of the American security umbrella. So they definitely look at the United States now as a superpower that brings much more instability and insecurity to the region rather than stability and security. As far as Lindsey Graham goes, this kind of talk does a lot to really harm the image of the United States in the Gulf subregion. As we've talked about before on this show, countries such as Saudi Arabia are very sensitive about questions that relate to sovereignty. The idea that they are puppets of the United States or that they take orders from another country is something that they do not take well to at all. Mohammed bin Salman is a leader who really likes to assert his autonomy and Saudi Arabia's autonomy and to assert that Saudi Arabia is an independent country. They do not want to be pulled into this war even more than they have right now. And this explains why the GCC states have been very reserved and very cautious. They've condemned Iran, and they've done everything they can to defend themselves from these Iranian missile and drone attacks. But they have chosen to not retaliate with their own strikes against Iran. Doing so could invite much more Iranian aggression toward them. And maybe this is a longer discussion we could get into another time, but I should point out that if they would retaliate against Iran by waging strikes against targets inside Iran, that could lead to much more division and tension within the Gulf Arab societies. In these countries, many people are still very angry about the genocide in Gaza. And if Saudi Arabia, for example, would wage military strikes against Iran, there are segments of Saudi society and segments of societies in other Arab countries that would interpret that as the kingdom being in de facto alignment with Israel against Iran, and that could create a lot of tension domestically. These are a few of the reasons why Saudi Arabia and other GCC states have been very reluctant to respond to Iran by attacking targets inside Iran. Bringing us back to Lindsey Graham, when he basically threatened Saudi Arabia, saying, you guys need to join the fight against Iran, or else they see that as a form of bullying. And therefore, choosing to show restraint has become a way for Saudi Arabia to assert its independence from the U.S. and to assert its rights as a sovereign country. However, we should point out, though, that if these Iranian attacks against the GCC states continue, they may come to a point where they decide that they have no choice but to fire back at Iran. However, thankfully, we're not at that point yet, and we can hope that there will be some de-escalation that takes place and some diplomatic wisdom that takes place before we get to that point.
Mm-hmm. Well, on a somewhat related note, there's the issue of Israel's relationship with the Gulf. And of course, the UAE had already normalized through the Abraham Accords, normalized relations with Israel. Saudi Arabia seemed to be maybe sort of shuffling in that direction. But now we're starting to see, even Emirati officials publicly criticizing Israel for escalating the war in ways that have, to your point, exposed the Gulf countries to retaliation. So I wonder your thoughts about whether or not this might force some of the GCC nations to reassess the status of their relationship with Israel, and whether it will freeze or derail any future moves towards normalization, particularly as it concerns Saudi Arabia.
Well, I don't know if any of the countries that are currently in the Abraham Accords in the GCC, again, that's UAE and Bahrain, are going to abrogate the Abraham Accords because of this conflict. Of course, anything is possible, but I would not bet on that outcome. I also think before this war started, mostly because of the genocide in Gaza, none of the other 4 GCC states were considering joining the Abraham Accords. So I don't know if the calculations about staying in the Accords or joining them will change because of this war. But what I will say, though, is that I think the perception of the Abraham Accords has changed because of this conflict. Back in 2020, a big talking points from the United States, of course, that being the first Trump administration back then, as well as the UAE, was that the Abraham Accords was going to usher in a new era of peace in the Middle East. The Gulf has been on fire for about 2 weeks right now. The idea that normalization deals with Israel have brought about peace to the region is just laughable. So the whole narrative behind the Abraham Accords has been completely undone as a consequence of this war, in my opinion.
Yeah, you would think so. Let's see how that plays out, I guess, afterwards. But I did want to ask you, in terms of relations with Iran, on the other side of this, before this war, Giorgio, we saw major diplomatic push, particularly led by China, to lower tensions between the Iran and the Gulf states, particularly between Iran and Saudi Arabia. We saw that rapprochement. But now Iran is, of course, firing missiles towards these countries, even threatening, their economic infrastructure, like banking institutions. They've hit, oil production facilities. Airports are getting hit, and of course, U.S. bases. And then there's all the falling debris from what the U.S. interceptors are taking out. All that's to say, when this war ends, what happens to those diplomatic efforts? Will Gulf states double down on trying to de-escalate with Iran? Because now they see what Iran's capable of in terms of, disrupting their security? Or do you think that the anger generated by this conflict will have the reverse impact and actually harden attitudes towards Tehran?
Yeah, those are really important questions. Tough to tell right now. But I think to begin, it's important to point out that one of the motivations that Saudi Arabia had for renormalizing diplomatic relations with Iran 3 years ago was to try to see to it that in the event that Iran was attacked by the U.S./Israel, that Saudi Arabia would not be targeted by Iran's wrath and the response from Iran. And the Saudis thought that having normalized diplomatic relations with Iran, making it very clear that if the U.S. or Israel would attack Iran, that would not be via any bases on Saudi soil or with Saudi airspace being used. However, as we obviously know, those strategies failed to protect Saudi Arabia from Iran's retaliation. So, in my opinion, I have to conclude that probably as a consequence of the past nearly 2 weeks, the Saudi-Iranian detente is over. And we would say that also about the detente between the UAE and Iran that actually began before the renormalization of Saudi-Iranian relations. The UAE, going back to the second half of 2019, started engaging Iran diplomatically to try to lower the temperatures and see to it that the UAE would not be collateral in any future war involving Iran. As I said, those strategies did fail. That being said, I think the GCC states, after the dust settles, will be of the view that the only way forward is through engaging Iran. I don't think they're going to want to have hostilities with Iran continue. I personally am not expecting them to sever diplomatic relations with Iran because of these missile and drone attacks, although that certainly is possible. So I think there's going to continue to be diplomacy between the Gulf Arab states and Iran because the GCC members believe that's the only path to stability. However, even with that engagement taking place, I think there's going to be a lot more suspicion of Iran and its motivations. There's going to be more distrust between the GCC states and Iran, and the relationships will be severely strained. But again, just to repeat, I do think the Saudis are going to try to engage Iran after the conflict, just simply because there's really no other option from the Saudi perspective. And as we've talked about before, the Saudis are focused on making Vision 2030, the grandiose economic diversification agenda, succeed. That requires attracting a tremendous amount of investment, business, and tourism from all over the world. And Saudi Arabia needs to have stability at home and in the neighboring countries for that to work out and to be successful. Within this context, they want to try to minimize and mitigate their tensions with Iran as much as possible. But granted, it's very difficult to do so given the current security crises plaguing the Gulf.
Well, and to that point, finally, I want to ask you a little bit about this issue of what this war is doing to the sort of core economic model of the Gulf states. And obviously, these economies have relied heavily on the perception that, you know, they're a safe, stable sort of pivot point for the entire international economy on multiple different levels. But now, of course, they are wrapped up in this major conflict, and that has certainly, I think, shattered that perception to some degree there. So I wonder, from your perspective, can the Gulf states actually, or will this do any sort of long-term reputational and economic damage to them when the war stops, which hopefully will be soon? Or could this potentially have a deeper impact on the way that they've organized their economies, given now that sort of the nature of the region perhaps might have undermined some of the global beliefs about the stability there in terms of investments and other forms of trade?
Well, maybe not permanently so, but there's no doubt that the image of the Gulf as a very peaceful, calm, and stable part of the world has been shattered. And the whole world's been seeing these images of these, you know, massive buildings, apartment complexes, and hotels going up in flames, these international airports that millions of people fly through every single day being closed down because of these attacks. This is a huge, huge challenge to Vision 2030 and the other economic plans and the other GCC states. But I think as the leaders of these countries see it, they have no choice but to try to do everything they can through diplomatic efforts to bring this conflict to a close as soon as possible, and then work very, very hard to restart these initiatives and to try to restore an image of stability and peace in the Gulf. It's going to be difficult to do that. There's no doubt that the past nearly 2 weeks of chaos that have set the Gulf on fire have done a lot of damage to Vision 2030 and these other economic development and diversification plans. And at the end of the day, if the Gulf Arab states can't diversify their economies away from oil and gas, there's going to come a day when their economies crash. So it's really difficult to exaggerate how much of an existential threat to the economic well-being of the GCC states this conflict has been. And this really, I think, is very much at the heart of why Gulf Arab states are so angry at the United States for starting a war that they believe was completely unnecessary and so dangerous.
Mm. Well, we always appreciate you having you here on the show with us, Giorgio Cafiero, CEO of Gulf State Analytics. As always, thanks so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All righty. We are going to continue to move forward here, switching to the other hemisphere of the world, but obviously a very significant ongoing U.S. escalation happening against Cuba, continuing to tighten the blockade there in every way, a U.S. engineered humanitarian crisis. And certainly the fuel embargo is the biggest aspect of it, cutting off vital energy supplies, making it very difficult to operate any aspect of the economy. So to help us understand the impact on everyday life, we are very happy to be joined here on the show once again by Luis de Jesus, a Cuba-based journalist with Breakthrough News. Luis, as always, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, Eugene. Hey, Rania. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Well, let me just ask you here as we get started, just give us a sense of the current state on the ground there, the current state of the crisis in Cuba.
Well, Eugene, right now Cuba is, as you know, dealing with a pretty tough situation. The country is being hit hard by the fuel shortages, the power outages, and of course the economic challenges that come along with all that. All made worse by the more direct attacks from the Trump administration, if we can say it like that, as its intensification of the blockade, including, of course, the recent imposed oil embargo. Of course, we're not just talking about electricity here. It's about the ripple effects this has on everything else, like access to basic goods, healthcare, transportation, basically all aspects of daily.
Yeah, I think we had to lose Luis there. Obviously, we really appreciate him as always, doing great coverage for us on the ground. But listen, in the context of a massive economic crisis, the internet is also going to be hit. I mean, the noose around Cuba is massive. There's so many different challenges that are happening. Just it's hard to even explain. I mean, I was there last year. I mean, you can't even collect the trash in the country because there's not enough gas for the garbage trucks to come through. So that thing is starting to create a public health crisis. Obviously, the electricity crisis is terrible and it's off and on, and they're doing everything they can, surging solar power and things like that. But you can't just snap your fingers and resolve many of these issues. There's no fuel coming into the country, so it's tough to operate. And this is already on top of the already existing issues of the blockade, where it's very difficult to get medicines in. It can be difficult to get food and energy anyway, even before what they were doing now, because of the context of the sanctions and the blockade on so many different issues. And so they're just piling issue on issue on issue on issue on Cuba. And the whole goal, obviously, is to try to force the Cuban people to take action against their own government, whether they like it or not, sort of in a gun to the head kind of moment, by saying, well, we'll just starve you out and destroy your life unless you change your government. So, I mean, it really is, I mean, I guess it's not unbelievable, but it is certainly outrageous, what they are doing here on every single level to Cuba. And it really is they're saying Cuba's next after Iran, is what Trump has been saying, that the government is going to fall, that they're going to target it, that there may be some sort of whatever. So anyway, really just another example of what Marco Rubio, again, I just keep coming back to this, at the Munich Security Conference, said that they want a new colonial crusade to assure Western dominance, I think was his phrase, or a new Western century, or whatever it may be. And no one should be ashamed in America and Europe of the slave trade, colonialism, colonizing Asia and Africa, because they want to do it again. And here we are.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely horrific. I think I've seen several times Trump, Rubio, Graham making like these crazy statements about what the destruction of Iran, and explicitly saying next we're going to come for Cuba. And I think Trump even made some remark of, oh, Cuba's going to be easy. It's just going to fall right away. So yeah, they're on a killing spree across the world in an effort to just bulldoze over everything that is standing in their way of just like 150% pure like submission of the world to American hegemony.
Yeah, I think it was Lindsey Graham.
But I will say they're having a very difficult time with Iran, and they haven't actually succeeded in Cuba. I mean, they're immiserating people. They're like killing loads of people in Iran, targeting civilian infrastructure, including like elementary schools, which is just horrifying to see. And of course, in Cuba, you know, they've been blockading Cuba, and now they've just, you know, gone total starvation blockade with this fuel starvation. But at the same time, like, they're still not necessarily getting their way. But they're behaving in just complete and utter barbaric manner, like total just monsters and ghouls. These are, you know, when you're like a kid and your parents are like, and you're like afraid of a monster, it's like, these are the monsters you're afraid of. Like, these people are actual like sociopathic, disgusting, uncivilized, barbaric monsters who speak in the name of civilization and like speak in the name of like values, but actually their values are literally bloodletting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it really is insane. I mean, I think Lindsey Graham said we're marching through the world, which is like exactly what they're doing, just murdering people. And by the way, this is a guy who had a crazy temper tantrum when there was a protest against the genocide in Gaza out in front of his house in South Carolina, and he went insane and started posting like crazy, like this is the worst thing that ever happened. But he's more than happy to lay waste to whole countries, kill school children, or all these other things. I mean, it just is a remarkable reality of like who these people are and what they're actually doing, and just how, I mean, you're right, how terrible it is. I saw somebody in South Asia was saying that, you know, the U.S. policy is East India Company 2.0. You know, I mean, it really is just sort of like you're either going to be sort of a slave or a servant to the U.S. or Europe, or they're just going to kill you. I mean, that really seems to be their mentality, and everything they're carrying it out, and it's again, it's not surprising necessarily, but it is outrageous. And I feel like that's just the nature of this, is we have to just keep laying this out. And I think for people in the United States, like, none of this is helping us. I mean, you know, you've got a situation where they spent $11 billion or something like that in the first week of the war. They're going to spend tens of billions of dollars where there's people on the street. There's 40 million people who are going hungry at any given time. There's hundreds of thousands of homeless people. People can't afford healthcare. You can't afford housing. You can't afford anything else. Like, Raytheon is not mailing you a check, you know, for what they're getting paid to do these missiles to destroy people's homes. Trump certainly is not sending you any checks as his wealth skyrockets by billions of dollars, in the context of these deals where they're connected to his own company, Witkoff, as well, by the way, with this crypto. And apparently they're telling countries around the world, if you want to deal with the United States, buy our crypto. I mean, the whole thing is wild. I think we may have Luis back with us in an audio only access. Luis, are you with us?
Hey, Eugene, can you hear me now? I'm sorry for the interruption.
No problem. We can hear you a little bit.
Can you hear me?
Well, let's see.
Let's see.
Yeah, maybe just start from the top where we were, just a little bit about, you know, what the situation is there on the ground.
Well, you know, these are consequences of the blockade. You know, one of the many consequences of the U.S. blockade. You know, the internet connection here. Well, I was saying, you were asking me for the sense of the current state of the crisis in Cuba. Well, I was saying that we're dealing with a pretty tough situation here in Cuba right now. Of course, one of the most notable problems are the power outages, which can last for hours and in some provinces even days. And that situation at the same time is provoking that the prices of products and goods keep rising, because in many cases, as you may know, the availability of some essentials is really limited, of course. That being said, we should always, I was telling you before, that we should always underline that the Cuban people are very resilient. Cuban people have been resisting for more than 60 years. And it is incredible how they always find ways to adapt and to keep on going, whether it's through community support or trying to make do with whatever resources they have. So just to summarize the answer, on the one hand, it's no secret that the Cuban people are actually feeling overwhelmed by the difficulties. But you also see a country that is not stopping, a country that looks for ways to reinvent itself.
Well, I think because of the internet's just not cooperating, so we're gonna have to do this another time, unfortunately. Louise is our breakthrough news reporter on the ground in Cuba, but as you can see, the internet is one of many things that is difficult to get functioning in Cuba because of what the U.S. is putting the country through right now. I mean, it's a common problem in these sanctioned countries. You do need fuel to like run internet, you know,
Yeah.
and so everything just when you starve a country of fuel, everything hurts.
Yeah, and you never know what sort of interference operations they may be trying to do to make people's life even worse. I mean, the U.S. will stop at nothing to destroy Cuba, and that's well documented. And I would just encourage folks to go back on our social media and our YouTube. Luis has been doing a lot of reporting on exactly what's happening on the ground, different things that are happening there. Friend of the show, Manolo de los Santos, has also been putting out some stories from his current travels there about what's going on. So we'll continue to keep you updated however we can on our YouTube and on our social media as it regards what's happening in Cuba and what's moving forward on that front. But Rania, maybe we should move forward here with the situation where you are in Lebanon, which is obviously becoming increasingly dire. I mean, obviously there's a significant refugee crisis. There's ongoing bombing, which is escalating, and the Israelis saying they'll escalate even more. There's an occupation on the ground in the south that's creeping north, or at least that's the intent of the Israeli forces there. So a significant and intensifying situation there. I just want to hand it to you for wherever you want to start us off on this conversation.
Well, I'll start you off with the latest numbers. So far, the Lebanese Health Ministry has recorded 687 killed in Lebanon. Of those 687, 98 are children, 62 are women, 18 are medical workers. So that means 25% of those killed are children, women, and medical workers. This is, of course, since March 2nd. That is when the war on Lebanon began. This new escalation after Hezbollah fired a few, like 6 rockets into northern Israel, doing 0 damage. Israel responded by completely unleashing. It's now clear that based on what Hezbollah has said and what Israeli media has said, Hezbollah did this, they say, as a preemptive attack on Israel, which had been planning to do a preemptive attack on Lebanon. It seems the Israelis were preparing something on Lebanon. So that was 2 days after the war in Iran started. Since then, every single day has been an escalation by the Israelis. We're getting these mass displacement orders for the south of Lebanon. At first, it was everything south of the Litani River. And that was on March 2nd. Today, for the first time, the Israelis issued displacement orders for south of the Zahrani River, which is actually north of the Litani River. It's caused mass fleeing across southern Lebanon towards the north once again. By now, a new layer of villages. It's increasingly clear that the Israelis are trying to depopulate the south and parts of the Bekaa in the east of Lebanon as much as they can, as well as the southern suburbs of Beirut, known as Dahye, which they issued mass evacuation or displacement orders for last Thursday, in order to depopulate these areas. So especially with the south, so that they can ultimately invade and try to hold on to as much territory as possible with as few Lebanese in it as possible, to create what they call a buffer zone, which is just essentially land theft. I mean, we see them doing it in Gaza. We see them doing it in Syria. They're trying to do it more in Lebanon. So this is like the state of play from the Israeli side of things. They've escalated across the country, though, especially in central Beirut, which has typically been a safe area where displaced people will actually go stay in. But the Israelis over the last week have randomly, in the middle of the night, bombed areas of central Beirut. They bombed a hotel days ago on the coast in central Beirut, killing 4 people. That was in a hotel that was housing a lot of displaced people. The Israelis claim that they killed members of the IRGC. The Iranians claim that they were Iranian diplomats. It's kind of unclear. We don't know the names of the people that were killed. They did another strike in central Beirut. And I know this, for those who don't understand Lebanon, this may seem like a random detail. But again, this is supposed to be a safe area. It typically has been throughout, frequent wars on Lebanon. A few nights ago, they hit an apartment. They actually destroyed 3 apartments in a building in central Beirut in an area called Verdun that is just like unusual, doesn't ever get bombed. They also had hit a hotel in an area, another suburb of Beirut, a Christian suburb of Beirut called Hazmihi. They've never bombed before. They hit a hotel there sometime last week. And then last night they hit an area called Ramlas al-Baida, which is a public beach in central Beirut where displaced people were sheltering. And they did a double tap strike there and killed, I saw numbers of 8 people this morning when I woke up, but that I've also seen people saying that 12 people were killed. But that was at 2 a.m. in the morning. And it was like really frightening. Last night, things escalated dramatically because Hezbollah, in coordination with the Iranians, fired something like 200 missiles at Israel. And I think maybe even hit at some point Tel Aviv, and the Israelis panicked and responded by just mass bombarding, carpet bombing the southern suburbs of Beirut, bombing the south, and also doing this massacre of displaced people on the public beach not far from where I live. And then today, just before we were recording, the Israelis issued warnings for buildings in the heart of central Beirut. One of which they hit with a double tap strike. And I'm not sure if they hit the other one, which is why I've looked distracted during this live stream. This is an area close to where I live and what I know very well. So I can't help but take my eye, but keep my eyes on the minute by minute updates. But I'm not sure if that second building they warned about has been hit yet. But given that, when they say they're going to hit a building, they do, it likely has been or will. All that's to say this is really frightening people, terrorizing people across the city. And one thing about Lebanon throughout wars that's been the case is that there's certain areas that are unofficially considered safe areas where displaced people can go take shelter in, where others kind of go about their daily lives. And it's really making everybody across the city feel unsafe, and increasingly across the country. And after that 200 rocket hit by Hezbollah yesterday night, the Israelis also threatened to start targeting civilian infrastructure connected to the government. So now the Lebanese government is desperately, going around diplomatically, just pleading anyone, anywhere possible, please make this stop. Even if it means the Lebanese army confronting and disarming Hezbollah, we will do that. They're basically agreeing to have peace talks with the Israelis, which has upset a lot of the country, but then also has a lot of the country backing it because they feel, there's people who feel very strongly that Hezbollah brought this war on by entering it. They feel that Hezbollah entered it on behalf of Iran. It, of course, didn't help that in Hezbollah's opening statement after they launched the missiles on March 2nd at the Israelis, that they did say, before they said anything else, that they were doing this to avenge the murder of Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. That did not help optically. But that said, it should also be stated that for 15 months prior to Hezbollah's entrance into this broader regional war, Israel violated the ceasefire that was agreed to in November 2024 over 15,000 times. They bombed Lebanon almost every single day. They killed nearly 400 people in that time. So in a way, it might have been at a lower level, but the war on Lebanon, specifically the south of Lebanon, never ended, and the government did nothing to protect its people or help them rebuild or reconstruct any of the damaged homes across the south in the 2024 war. So, people say Hezbollah entered the war. They did enter a regional war, but, they also did say in that statement that they were responding to those 15 months of ceasefire violations, that they had not, Hezbollah held its fire. People are making the argument that if only Hezbollah didn't exist, or if Hezbollah didn't, fire, at Israel, if they would just hold their fire, Lebanon would be spared. But that's not actually entirely correct, because we saw 15 months Hezbollah held their fire and Lebanon was not spared. But what is happening is a massive escalation across the country You do now have the Lebanese government. They've banned Hezbollah's military wing, made it illegal, made their military activities illegal. Of course, that hasn't actually stopped their military activities. And, they have also called for negotiations for peace with the Israelis even before the Israelis hold their fire. And the Israelis are basically giving the Lebanese government, even though that's what they've always wanted, they're giving the Lebanese government the middle finger and saying, no, we will militarily take care of Hezbollah ourselves. And they have 100,000 troops stationed at the southern border with Lebanon. And they are very much in favor of ultimately invading Lebanon, though it seems like maybe they want to wait until their war with Iran is over because they are distracted. They really want to their intelligence and air power on Iran. They're saying that themselves. So in the meantime, that doesn't, that hasn't spared Lebanon. Lebanon is still being hit very, very hard. It's an increasingly scary and precarious situation where the security of everyone who lives here is just rapidly deteriorating. And there are, as I, in my update last week, there is a concern about tensions and civil chaos. People are very polarized on this. It's not just everybody supports resistance. It's not how Lebanon is. It's never been that way. But I think more than ever, Hezbollah has a domestic audience in Lebanon that is very angry at it. That's just the reality of the situation. There's a lot of sectarianism here. There's displaced Shias in areas where people don't like them because they're sectarian against Shias and they blame them for everything Hezbollah does. So the longer this goes on, and I think the Israelis are hoping for this, the longer it can lead to civil chaos. And there's also the issue of perhaps the Lebanese army confronting and disarming Hezbollah, but they would be doing that in the middle of a war on the country. So there's a lot of debate about whether that's wise to do or not, to disarm your people in the middle of an aggressive war that's not necessarily going to stop just because you disarm Hezbollah. So today, actually, there was this kind of anonymous letter put out by people in the Lebanese army essentially saying that they would refuse orders if they were told that they had to confront their own population. They didn't explicitly say to disarm Hezbollah, but that's what they were saying. I mean, essentially, that's what that means is like if we are given orders to do this, we will not do it because it would basically start a civil war. And we first and foremost want to protect the unity of this country, not fight our own countrymen. It doesn't even seem clear that the Lebanese army would do that if they were given the order to. They haven't, necessarily been given that order yet. I just want to note that Israel has a dream for greater Israel, and that includes South Lebanon, and they see this as an opportunity. I think Hezbollah's gamble here, and it is a big gamble. It is a very big gamble. They've demonstrated that they are not as weak as everybody thought they were after the huge blow they took in 2024, where their entire senior leadership was killed by the Israelis and much of their armaments were destroyed by the Israelis. They have, rebuilt their own weapons, homemade, and clearly have demonstrated that even though they were technically being disarmed south of the Litani, they were quickly able to regroup and launch and fight the Israelis. I mean, there's ground battles taking place right now south of the Litani. So they are still fighting a fighting force that's able to, launch 200 missiles at Israel and do damage and scare people there, and hit the Israeli army units that are stationed nearby. But it stands to be seen whether that's enough to deter the Israelis, because Hezbollah, even if it's not as weak as everybody thought it was, it's still weaker, especially because of the domestic situation in Lebanon as well. So, it's a huge gamble. It's not entirely like what the end game is. There are people saying, ultimately the idea is enter this war because it's a regional war. And if you're not at the table, you don't get to be a part of the settlement. So once there's an Iran settlement, Lebanon will be folded into that settlement, though that's not a guarantee. And the Israelis are saying they'll continue on Lebanon even after they're done with Iran. So, that's my update for now, Eugene. It's a very tumultuous situation, and I'm very stressed out and not sleeping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, oh Jesus, Christ, sorry. No, I appreciate that, and we all appreciate that update. Actually, as I told you yesterday, but I'll say it on air, someone actually stopped me in the street to say how much they appreciate all the updates you're giving and the reporting you're doing from Lebanon. So very appreciative with us, and we really appreciate you being willing to, just stick with it and let us know what's going on. Critical situation for the world, and I'm really glad you mentioned the Greater Israel Project, because, it really is, this is who they are. You know what I mean? Like, their entire, it's like, we're just going to destroy this entire region to force it to conform to what we want to see and to stabilize our just totally genocidal, ethnic cleansing apartheid project. No matter how many lives it costs, no matter how much destruction it costs, like, we're just going to go ahead with it 100%. And it really is just unbelievable on so many different levels. And, we've talked about this quite a bit since October 7th. It can only remind you of apartheid South Africa, which of course launched a major offensive starting in 1978 to try to reshape the entire region of Southern Africa, no matter what the cost was and no matter how many people they killed. And they killed a lot of people, and they destroyed a lot of countries, ultimately totally backfired on them. But nonetheless, a lot of that damage is still to this day affecting some of these countries in Southern Africa. So we can see how dangerous, how terrible this is. And you hope it can stop soon, but it really does feel like we've been in a permanent war since October 8th. From Israel has just decided to extend this genocidal ethnic cleansing occupation project, no matter what the cost. But we'll continue to cover it. We'll continue to follow it. Again, just continue to follow everything that we are doing here. Rania is doing a lot of live streams, a lot of different pieces that are touching on all the different elements of what's going on and all the different fronts and all the different theaters. So, hit subscribe, hit the bell, make sure your alerts are on, because we're going to try to cover this from all angles and all sides, in addition to covering everything else happening around the world that is of great concern and ultimately all interconnected in this reality. So I think that more or less will do it for us here today. Any final pieces you want to leave people with, Rania?
Yeah, I want to remind everybody to please make sure you hit the like button. That's super important. It helps boost us in the algorithm. Please make sure you've smashed the like button. Also, please consider supporting Breakthrough News. We're able to bring you the kind of on-the-ground coverage I'm able to give you from Lebanon, the kind of on-the-ground coverage we're able to give you from Cuba, from Venezuela, all of the interviews that we do and the live streams and the written journalism that we're doing. We had a piece by Naveed Zarinel, reporting from the ground in Tehran. You can go check that out at breakthroughnews.org. You can help support that kind of work by going to patreon.com/breakthroughnews and becoming a member. You'll be able to access exclusive content, exclusive merch, but most importantly, you'll be supporting an independent media outlet that's so important in the face of just the tsunami of insane pro-war propaganda that we get from corporate media. And I'll also add, I'm not sure the details, Eugene, you can maybe help details here. We have a newsletter. Am I right? We have a newsletter now that people can sign up for by email.
Yes. We have a newsletter that is...
Do we know?
I believe if you go to breakthroughnews.org, you can sign up for it. And then also on our social media, when we're posting it, there is also, directions on how you can find it every single day, updates on the Iran war. I've been following it on Instagram since I now am on Instagram, but it's also on X and other places. So go to our website, follow it on social media. There are instructions for how you can do it, but we're giving updates every single day. I think it's the best way to figure out what's going on, because I think, as many people know, there's so much happening. It's hard to keep track of in the course of your everyday life, I know, for a lot of people. And this will definitely make sure you have the key points about everything that's happening in the region in relationship to the Iran war, what's happening in Lebanon, anything that's sort of related tangentially or maybe not so tangentially is there. And it's coming out in the latter half of the day, every single day. So you're there. So definitely at BT Newsroom on all your social media platforms, breakthroughnews.org, you will be able to get our daily newsletter on Iran and related issues.
Well, and on that note, Eugene, do you want to sign us off?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I apologize. I'm all over the place today. But yes, I think that's pretty much it. I just want to give a big shout out to all of our guests. Big shout out to all of our viewers. Like I said, it's always really great to hear from you. And I've been able to hear from a number of people this week about how much you appreciate Breakthrough News. Big shout out to all of our patrons. And please, we need you now more than ever. So please go to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And a big shout out to our entire Breakthrough News team, as always, for making this show possible and everything else we do. For myself, for Rania, for all of us at BT, we will see you next time.